Welcome back, everybody. Um, I plan on going over a brand new um, scenario today. I've created pretty much, I think, the largest scenario that I have ever created, short of like a full world-spanning um, global game, which probably I'll eventually get to. Um, Although, there's so much differences in how you could set up a world scenario that likely it's pretty much the equivalent of a sandbox. But for the second fleet, for the North Atlantic area, which is where we're focusing on today, um, you can create a generally accurate second fleet scenario, North Atlantic scenario. I'm titling this scenario World War III, just like the one for Sixth Fleet. The idea would be that eventually you could theoretically take all of the Third World War missions from each of the um, different fleet series that I've created, and you could combine them, right, to become that world scenario. So I'm kind of building up toward that. So I want to talk a little about my approach to doing that. It's not as easy as one would think, although maybe it is easy as you think. And so let's go through that, and then we'll go in game and we'll take a look at the setup, and I'll talk a little bit about like how do you even process a game of this size? Okay, so the idea here is if we're talking North Atlantic, then basically we want to involve all of our countries and setups that are in the North Atlantic. Second Fleet obviously um, uh, focuses on that. So I'm starting the um, with the uh, strategic setup, the final game. It doesn't actually have a number to it, but I'm naming it number 10. So for Second Fleet, number 10, we're calling it World War III. And essentially what that is you take your deployment, you set up your where you are initially setting up all your forces, which is quite a lot. It's pretty much every marker in the game that comes with Second Fleet, and you determine. So I mean, everyone can do it differently. The way I set it up is I made an assumption of about a medium setup. So essentially anything that is listed as up through the prepared preparedness level moderate would be on the board to start with, and then anything that would come in afterwards would be put down as a reinforcement. Okay, so that means that the U.S. is going to get about, I think, 3 carriers. None of them start on the board. I think all of them come from the south or west. So I'm using this in a combination with the Soviet deployment as well as the reinforcement charts. Okay, so Second Fleet uses a dynamic of you roll a die I guess every turn or every strategic scenario, every 3 turns, and you that's how many boxes you move up. I You can do it that way if you want, and you can set it up like that, where you can take what I've set up and you just basically don't activate them or don't actually start processing them until you get to that box. But I'm essentially using these boxes um, as essentially turns, right? Essentially turns um, after the game starts. So for moderate setup, the Soviets start with box 9, and the Americans, NATO starts at box 15. Okay, so essentially I use that. Now from Second Fleet, the only thing that really I'm not including is I didn't bring any boomers in, so no ballistic missile submarines are in that. So any of the mechanics of in a strategic, like if you protect the boomers and stuff, there's really not that dynamic at play here. Um, I, if people want me to add in the boomers, I can. It's not hard, but it just wasn't something that I thought was too important. Okay, because I wanted to kind of do a little more of the actual war with taking over countries and so forth. I wanted to focus on that because that to me is more interesting. Um, and the parachute units, right? Second Fleet controls via how many markers you get for these parachute units. As I discussed in my last video, I discuss or I control that via the number of air transport units you have, and if they get shot down, then you can't use anymore, right? So So it pretty much you don't have just like full willy-nilly ability to move troops by paratrooper because the enemy could shoot them down, right? If one cap mission intercepts your ATRs, they automatically die. So yeah, it's kind of dangerous. So anyhow, so that's what I use that. In addition, I also use the French expansion of Second Fleet. So all the units that are included with the French expansion are also listed in, and it also adds them into the deployment setup, right? So for where they start and depending on your preparedness level. So again, I followed medium for that matter. Um, Generally, between Second Fleet expansion and the base game, I treated the forces as additive. I could not do the same with Third Fleet. So Third Fleet I added into it as well. So this is a combined orders of battle from the Third Fleet North Atlantic pieces, right? So Third Fleet's a weird game, right? It essentially brings in like two more U.S. carriers, but those carriers are really only useful in the Pacific, and then I think in the Caribbean theaters, those carriers also show up, which isn't really totally accurate, um, but in the North Atlantic, here I'm showing what I'm showing here is the final large scale mission. I think it's called Soviet Offensive in the North Atlantic. This is scenario 12. So essentially, I took the setup from scenario 12 and I added it to the setup for Second Fleet. Now, I try to use some intelligence here. Um, Ships that are listed in both games, obviously, Second Fleet takes precedence over where they're at, right? Second Fleet, I think, is your main game. I think it's probably the one we trust more when it comes to North Atlantic than Third Fleet. So if a ship is listed in both sides, which includes the Russians have a lot of ships that are listed twice, um, as well as the Brits. I treat where the Brits or where the Second Fleet shows them starting as where it is. In addition, from an aircraft standpoint, I tried not to be generally additive, right? There's a lot of duplicative forces. So for the British, I tried to keep that in mind when I set up the game initially. Not just this scenario, but when I wrote the game from the ground up, I kind of assumed that Second Fleet's data is a little repetitive from. I'm sorry, Third Fleet's is repetitive from Second Fleet. So, you know, just because they both have like Nimrods, I don't add the Nimrods together, right? Same thing with the Russians. I try not to add everything together, although I probably err on the side of from a balance perspective, making sure the Russians have plenty of air power. But how I've set up the mission, I haven't brought everything in that the deployment shows. Like for instance, if you were to add up all the backfires that get added in from Third Fleet and Second Fleet, you'd have quite a bit. And if you used all of them on the map, then essentially you're saying that they got nothing in the Pacific, right? Well, there's probably something going on in the Pacific. So I tried to use some intelligence there. So, but again, it's a setup, right? And y'all could add them. You could add in more aircraft. You can do whatever you want. But it's a great template to start with. Okay. In addition, for the many of the European countries, I've also added in expansion units, right? So a lot of these countries, like the Dutch or the Germans, or or the Norwegians or the Swedish or the Finnish, right? Those forces had a limited amount covered in the scope. But through the research I did when setting up the game, I added in all those as well. Most of them are coming in like they come in at a delayed, right? Because you could assume they're like reinforcements or things that maybe reserves that need to get set up. So when we get into the game, again, you're going to see quite a number of units. It's probably the largest number that I've ever created in one single scenario. And you can adjust those as you see fit. Um, in addition, from Third Fleet, there is the concept of the Baltic nations. Okay, so Poland and East Germany get units, which are listed here as well. So you'll see all those as well. Okay, so it's pretty much like a full up Baltic North Atlantic scenario. So lots and lots of units. Um, and again, you can trim things as much as you want if it's too much. or you could add more things if you wanted to even be more epic. Okay, so um, let's go to the game. In the game, I have not added in too many new features. A couple of bug fixes, more cosmetic really. In a couple of the scenarios, I made sure that the ends phase is up toward the top for phases where you would normally not do something unless you want to do something. Instead of having you to move your mouse down every time to end phase, I moved it up to the top, so it's like basically your default place that your cursor would rest. In addition, someone reported that they had some problems with on multiple monitors where the game kind of showed up a little weird. So I took off a feature that basically sets a default to be like your primary size screen, which if you have multiple monitors, it means that you'll essentially have a blown out, like the game will basically be focused in on one area. You can't even see the whole map, right? So I kind of changed that. So now it should just essentially be, you would be in control of like its sizing and how big it is on the window. But basically it pops up just like just like you're seeing it now. It just pops up and fills up your whole screen. So I think it should work. If there's any updates to that, let me know. Okay, so let's go over the rules. So what are the missions of this giant scenario? Well, I'd like to treat this as pretty much that this is World War III, right? So what would the Russians be trying to do? Likely the Russians would be trying to take bases that prevent them from having a straight line access to the North Atlantic, where they can intercept convoys that are heading to Europe from the United States, right? So as a result, what I've done is for each base, I've set up a garrison. I followed what I generally followed was from a order of magnitude perspective. I followed what Second Fleet established as the kind of like the intrinsic defense value. So um, I didn't put it all the way down to two. So I kind of put it at its minimum that it could be, which is like 10. So pretty much every base in Norway has an intrinsic value of 10. Okay. And then what I've done is for all of the bases in the Soviet Union, let's take a look. For Pechanga, for instance, I just essentially for the Russian bases, the garrison value is really just determining how much forces, available forces you have to invade, right? So I wanted to give the Russians plenty of forces that they could use to airlift or to sea lift, because as we've seen in Ukraine, right? I the Russians aren't going to run out of people very quickly, right? And they never seem to run out of anybody. So so essentially, I've set it up so that they have plenty of forces at every single base to utilize toward taking over. Okay, now um, so that means that essentially, with the two ways the Soviet Union is going to score points in this are by sinking things, which there's a specific number of VPs that you get for each type of ship, which I list in the rules, and taking over bases. And for every base that they take over, I recommend you give them like 10 victory points for it, right? Now, I have not done like a ton of like long-term testing and gaming of this particular scenario to understand what's like a very good number to use from a balancing perspective. So again, this is a sandbox, and the game doesn't track VPs. Period. Like it doesn't force you to award VPs at a certain level. It's up to you, right? So I'm just giving you what in the rules. I'm giving you what I recommend. Okay. So in the special rules piece, I kind of talk about, or actually and this is another feature I did. Now you can scroll through the rules here. So you got certain victory points for destroying units, and then you have objectives and VPs. And essentially, I'm saying that for each NATO base captured, award 10 VPs. Um, and then you take the Soviet value minus the Allies' value at the end of the game, whenever you decide to finish, and that's the way you'll score it. I set it as just similar to the other mission. I set it to be 63 game turns, which is 3 weeks. But again, you can send it to wherever you want. You also could on the side be doing the armistice stuff that comes with Second Fleet. But I didn't add that into the game. That you can do that on the side if you want, like a side kind of story happening that tells you when to end the game. or when to count up VPs. I'm considering this a little more straightforward because it's a combination of second and third. So, uh, you know, it's pretty much score points, and at the end of the game, you count the points and see who wins, which pretty much is pretty straightforward, right? So, um, some other interesting things. All right, so I added in the Swedish units. All of the aircraft are sitting at Stockholm. You won't be able to start the game with them sitting here. You'll have to spread them out because they validate stacking. But at least in the setup forces phase, it allows you to. I added in all of the Swedish Navy. Now this is a combination of ships that are actually in the game and then additional ones, right? So I did my research, and the number of Stockholm Gothenburg class PCs, they had enough to actually have four of these or five of these counters. So I added those two other ones in, but they're 4 days away. Okay, so it's going to take some time for them to get. Yeah, you can update, you can up up this in route, right? Or either make them show up earlier or make them show up later. In addition, um, Third Fleet has this weird mechanic of not wanting to show all of the subs and stuff that would be in the Baltic. Um, if you want to follow those rules, you can. I think it essentially means you're gonna. I'm not sure how you would do it with this game because you can't just like admin wise like kill things or damage things. I haven't given you that capability. Maybe if you guys want that capability of doing things like that from an admin perspective, let me know. It's actually quite a bit of coding, but I would put it if I get enough people saying that they want that kind of feature. And so that purely allows you like to do things on the outside of the game and then implement them within the game, right? As like a secondary kind of thing. Um, so what I do is I'm actually adding in, and for the Swedish, you could actually I actually added in all the subs that the Swedish Navy had at that time. Now I only added in three. There's a bunch others, but I decided to kind of go middle of the ground, and I only added in three. Finland, I did the same thing. None of the games have forces for Finland, but I added in Finland. Finland has a couple of Riga class frigates, as well as some PCs, patrol craft, as well as some minesweepers. They had a very small air force, so I didn't even add any. I didn't add any air for them. Now these countries start neutral. So, but think about it. This is, I mean, how many VP can the Russians get by doing this? So, by the Russians declaring war on these countries, they can actually drop troops or land troops via the Baltic or via airdrops to, um, yeah, to take over, right? So, um, that's something that I think the Soviets will have the capability of doing. And you can do that either right now, right? You could align these to any country. You could even align Finland to the Soviet Union, right? If we did, let's see if you click on that, I believe, yeah, align country to allies or Soviets. You could do either one of those. What I would plan on doing, I would likely have these start as neutral and then allow it to be something that the Russians um, do. So now the Baltic. Let's talk about the Baltic. So with the Baltic, um, I try to come up with some rules of like what would prevent you from sending ships from the Baltic out into the North Sea. And essentially, what I have put down is that if you add up the number of Russian troops landed at a combination of Karlskrona, Copenhagen, and Oslo, that if you add those up, and I can't remember. I think I said if you have like 20. What did I put in the rules? I think I said if you have Denmark Straits, it's up to you how you treat the Denmark Straits. I would recommend something like requiring 20 Soviet strength in all three ports to consider the Baltic Fleet breaking out. Okay, so that's just my guidelines. You can use whatever you want, but I was trying to come up with some way that would force the Russians that if they want to break out and bring these forces to bear out in the North Sea to help, you know, to help win the war, that they got to land troops at Karlskrona, Copenhagen, and Oslo, which kind of makes sense. Um, this is a fun scenario with a bunch of units. So the entire West German Navy essentially is here. I think the only things from the West German Navy I left off was they got a crap ton of diesel boats, and I've only added in like 3 diesel boats out of theirs. But you can add the rest in if you want. So these diesel boats are not in the game, and but I added them in. Um, Same thing. I think I added in some uh, the Polish Navy. Actually, they build. I think they build Rapuch. No, I can't remember what Polnichoi. I can't remember. There's some type of AA ship that the Polish build, and they had a bunch of them at the end of the Cold War, or before the end of the Cold War. So I gave them that, and I added those in. So now they have significant forces between, um, landing troops and cargo ships and AA ships. And remember, with the garrison setting, which is what I've set as, I put that as a default for this thing. You don't have to use it, but if you don't use it, you could use full land combat and then basically go through the complicated scenario of using land combat, or a simpler attempt at using garrison combat. If you don't use either of these, then like I mentioned in the Sixth Fleet scenario, you can't really do anything, right? You can't take over anything. So, and I'm sure the Russians really want to take stuff over, right? That's kind of like the whole point of why they attack in every scenario. Um, okay, so airdrops. I did add in. I gave each side 2 ATRs. So the Russians have an ATR up in no, right here in Leningrad, and I think they have another one up here somewhere too. I can't remember where I put it, but I think they have an ATR somewhere up in the Kola Peninsula, as well as for the Americans, or for the NATO, I put a ATR in France, which kind of represents the French Rapid Deployment Force that would be sent to the north to Norway, as well as one at Lake and Heath. Okay, so this mission is like super chock full of units, so it's gonna be a lot of fun. It might be a bit too big for you, right? So again, try it out, and then bring it, make it smaller if you want. There is another scenario that I created for the Second Fleet called just the Battle of the Atlantic, and it's a much smaller scope, and it just has Russian subs, and it just has a bunch of escorts. There's no carriers, and like a small, really small version of this attack. But this one is like kind of full Monty. I wanted to go crazy a little bit. So, you can follow the rules that are set up from a setup. Essentially, I created stacks of units that give you the ability to you have some guidance on what you do for it. So, for instance, for the Russians, that's one of the things that probably helps best from Second and Third Fleet together is that the Russians get a lot of subs. So so for the Russian setup, what you really have is you have some stuff coming in that's coming in multiple turns later, right? So they got reinforcements coming in. In addition to that, they also have the Kuznetsov that they get from Third Fleet up here in the Barents Sea, and I think on this one I said you can put them anywhere in the Barents Sea. The Kiev group, which you can put anywhere in Greenland, Barents, or Norwegian zone, so basically anywhere in here you can place them. Subs here that are in these can be placed anywhere in Barents. These subs can be placed anywhere in, I think, Greenland, Iceland, and Norwegian or Svalbard. And um, and then this huge stack is you can spread those out all over the map. Okay. The only place that you're not allowed to put these guys is you can't put these guys in the Barents and you can't put these guys in Baltic. Okay. So it basically keeps them in the North Atlantic. Now, as you hear, here's the French. They're set up the way they are supposed to be set up. You'll notice that in the French expansion, you don't get any of their carriers. Not really sure what the reasoning for that is. Probably balancing. So if you were editing this, if you were taking this as a template, but like updating it before you start it, that's probably one of the things you do. You'd probably add in either the Bach or the Clemenceau. Oak. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that. It's a kooky word, and if you say it too quick, people think you're cursing. So my assumption is though that much of the French fleet is going to be in the Mediterranean, but are both carriers going to be in the Mediterranean? I don't know. When you do your global war, when I set up my global war, you'll definitely have to pick where you want to put that, what you put both carriers. Okay. So for the Brits, Arc Royale, I'm assuming is going to be in the Mediterranean, so I don't list it here. For the Americans, pretty much they don't have a whole lot of stuff on the board at first. They have some stuff, but most of their big bangers are coming in route here, right? So when they arrive, you'll be able to place them in any one of these little spots over here, and then they'll be able to enter the fray. I also have some American stuff coming in from the south. This is, I guess, assuming that you get some stuff from the Caribbean or something like that. So there's some forces here. This is all based on how the scenario sets them up. Like essentially said, they gave like locations like on the map where they would show up at turn whatever, and then I just basically walked it back however far it need to be so that their starting point would make sense. And then essentially the goal would be that if my math is right, that if they were traveling and you didn't stop them, they would get to that point at that time um, of the scenario. Okay. Um, so overall, you got quite a ton of forces. The Spanish have a small group here. The Portuguese have some. These are both add-ins from Third Fleet, essentially. So it's a huge scenario. Um, I really hope people like give it a go. It is probably the most complex and will tax. I think will tax probably your concentration and tax your ability to manage so much stuff at one time. But hey, I think that's part of the fun of it. And like I said, um, it only takes a click or two to remove things. The first thing you probably want to think about removing is you go through all your forces and you see the things that are like being reinforced over time, and you take those guys out. That's how I would look at it. Um, let's see. Standing Naval Force Atlantic is going to be here. I think we could say you could move them anywhere within the Norwegian zone. Um, yeah, bringing in the Swedish and the Finnish will be fun. And I think that's about it. So let's see here. I'm not going to go through like um, deploying this thing because it's quite a big scenario. What I am going to let you know is that the next big scenario I'm going to do is going to be the Seventh Fleet. So essentially, it'll be like the full up Soviet Red Banner Pacific Fleet, the American Seventh Fleet, all the Japanese. I'll probably set up a bunch of the countries as neutral, except for ones that I know would probably be on the U.S. side, like South Korea and Japan, of course. But I'll probably set it up where the whole thing with China and Taiwan will be something you'll have to. The forces will be there and they'll be set up, but you'll have to determine whether or not you bring them into the scenario or not. But anyway, I'm looking forward to that. The goal is to create one of these big scenarios in each of the areas, the main areas, which to me would be Pacific. I plan on not doing like I already did some scenarios for the North Pacific, so Third Fleet I don't plan on doing like a specific scenario, huge scenario that involves the Aleutians or the Kamchatka Peninsula. I plan on rolling that into the Seventh Fleet mission. But essentially, I'd like to create like four big World War III scenarios in the Indian, Pacific, North Atlantic, and the Mediterranean, and then attempts to do like a full world big thing. But again, a lot of that will be determined by your interest. So let me know if you're interested in those missions. Let me know if you'd like me to work on something different. Let me know if there's any features that you'd like me to add in. Either way, I hope you had fun with this mission. This one's a big honker, and it's available now on the new version of the tool. Okay, um, and hopefully by this time you guys know how to get the newest version. But essentially, it's on the where is it? It's on my Google Drive, right? So it's gonna be right over here. You're just gonna get it from this one here, which I've given everybody the link to that. I'll put it probably um, in Facebook when I get it. So you'll have access to that. Once you get that, you'll get the new template. It's listed as Second Fleet 2.10. Third World War. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you have been enjoying the missions, and please, if you are trying to play the game and you're getting any issues, instead of getting frustrated, well, you can get frustrated and also let me know what the problem is, right? Because I've been very quick about fixing these things. So anyway, I appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you next time.